Wow, just completed the podcast that you're about to see. Very excited. When I had a vision for all of this stuff, this was one of the ones that I had in my mind. So we brought in Betty Phelps, Andrea McKey, Adrienne Frierson, just superstars in their own right. But the fact that they're all related, the fact that they represent 3 generations of real estate agents, it was really, really cool to have them in here. So thank you very much. There's some really, really cool stuff that's in here. And if you don't leave this one feeling inspired, then call me. We need to check your pulse. So don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast, the audio version, via Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcast, Stitcher, all those ways. This is a video podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe because we're going to be pumping these out probably once a week. So thank you so much, and you're going to enjoy this one. So welcome to the Roundtable. We have the royalty, Baton Rouge Real Estate royalty with us, so I really appreciate it. We've got Andrea McKey, Betty Phelps, Adrienne Frierson. So 3 generations of realtors, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So thanks for being here, first of all. But what I'd like to just talk about is talk about sort of how this sort of evolved. So Ms. Phelps, I'd love to start with you and just kind of tell me how you originally started this and kind of how it got to this one here 3 generations later.
Well, I went to the Y to take a scuba diving course years ago. Got to the Y, the course had been canceled. The only other thing was a real estate course. Mm-hmm. And since I had a babysitter, I went inside in the real estate course. And I had been interested in real estate and had bought and sold on my own before that course. And then I met a fellow by the name of Ken Osterberger. He lived in our neighborhood, and he said, "You ought to sell real estate. Come talk to a man that I work for." And I had tried teaching school. I taught a year at St. Luke's, and I hated every minute of it. And I told the good Lord if he'd let me get through that year, he would never have to worry about me teaching school again. And my 2 children were in the lower at St. Luke's. So I was free and unencumbered. And I went over and talked to Derwood Gully, who Ken Osterberger worked with. And he said, "Come, let me let you talk to the sales manager," who was Bob Brooks. So I visited with Bob Brooks and said, "I'll get back with you." And I had a little business at my home. I got a book out of the library, learned how to cane chairs, did the caning and the rush seats. And I made more money doing that than I did my first year in real estate. So I hated to give it up. But Bob Brooks came over one afternoon and visited, and we talked about real estate, and he convinced me that it might be something I really enjoyed. And so I gave it a try, and that was August the 1st, 1971.
Wow.
And stayed in it. Then I didn't sell real estate. I went into Gully's investment division, where we put together limited partnerships, subchapter S corps. We'd get out and find a rundown apartment complex. We would get out and get investors to invest in the project. We acted as a general partner. They were limited partners, and did very well. Yeah. Our partners always, without exception, made a profit when we sold the project. And there were 4 of us in that. Ken Osterberger, Resden Wood, and Carter Rames and myself. And I loved that. I mean, that was great. And then money got tight. The 80s came along. Real estate investment trusts became defunct.
Right.
And so, of course, we did away with our investment division. Then I went into sales. And Bob Brooks was a great mentor. In fact, the first week of trying to sell houses, I had an open house out in Jefferson Terrace because Durwood Gully had just developed Jefferson Terrace. And on a Sunday afternoon, I had this open house and somebody came in and I looked up and they wanted to buy the house. And I got on the phone with Bob Brooks. I didn't know how to write a contract. I've been doing this for 1 week. And bless his heart, he stayed on the phone with me for, I know, 2.5 hours. And we wrote up the contract, and that was the first contract that I had ever written. And Bob had untold patience. And so I had a number of contacts because prior to having children, I worked for the Girl Scouts. I was field director for the Girl Scouts, so I knew lots and lots and lots of people. And that was my foundation to get back in touch with those people.
Right.
And they were so responsive when they had real estate needs. They'd call me, but it was just a great platform. And so Gully brought me into the development part. He developed subdivisions such as Centurion Place,
Okay.
built Runnymede, built Sharpstown, finished Jefferson Terrace, and on and on and on. So with me, I was with the right person at the right time.
Right.
He was a mentor. He was a fantastic real estate man. He could see a piece of property and say, see that vacant land? 5 years from now, it's going to be a subdivision, a shopping center, or something like that.
What a vision.
Yeah.
He taught me everything I knew.
Well, that's neat. So how did you get from the residential world into, y'all became partners at one point, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Bob left and went out on his own.
Right.
And I took over as sales manager. And then he asked me to buy in with him. And
Right.
so we were partners, Gully and Phelps. And
When was that?
let's see, that was 1989.
Okay.
And we had, I think, 7 salespeople. And at that time, because prior to that, he had had a heart attack.
Okay.
He was fearful for his health. And so he sold Gully and Associates to J. Crow.
Okay.
Some of the agents went with C.J. Brown, but the majority went with J. Crow.
Okay.
And so we stayed there 2 years. And then he and I decided we were going to do our own thing, and that was 1989. And times were hard. Interest rates were 21%, and I can remember a subdivision we were developing, Round Oak subdivision out of Jefferson Highway, and the rates went up on that. We still owned Centurion Place, and it was either a do or die sort of situation. A lot of good men left Baton Rouge, had to declare bankruptcy. But we worked our way through it, and
How do you sell real estate when interest rates are 20%?
you don't very well.
It's interesting putting it to perspective.
Yeah.
You know, as people talk about interest rates now.
But then everybody needs a house.
Right.
And the prices then were so low, and the federal government stepped in with a few projects that helped.
Right.
In Bakerfield, out in Baker, in North Baton Rouge, you could buy a house for $200 down, no closing costs. So,
wow,
it made a difference. But you didn't have then $700,000, $1 million houses.
Right.
That was unheard of. In fact, you know, there were so many in the $30,000 to $60,000 range
Right.
that you'd sell a lot of houses for a little money, but it was survival of the fittest.
Right.
And then as you stay in real estate, you make your own investments and get out and see what's going on and buy a regular A-zone lot, and you go from door to door and try and get it rezoned to B1, and then you turn around and sell it. And, you know, that was the way we made our personal living. The brokerage business was a step to make your own investments.
It's interesting perspective. Yeah, I can see that. So my first memories were Gully Phelps McKey. So how did that come about?
Well, before Miss Gully died, Andrea had come to work in sales, and Gully really thought that Andrea, and he was right, would just do super in sales, which she did, has, and will. And then he talked David into coming in the construction part, because Gully had a construction company, mortgage company, and then the residential bit. And then when Gully died in 1994, David was already also working in the company. And in 1993, I had lost my husband. And then the next year, 94, Gully died. Well, that was my whole support system. And so David came in, we changed the name, and then he and Andrea just took over and ran with it and grew it, and that's where we are now.
Wow.
They've just really made a big company out of it, where Gully and I didn't want a big company. We wanted to be able to handle and manage and control, because then in 1971, the highest award given, once a year, the Baton Rouge Board recognized the outstanding listing agent and outstanding selling agent. And then the selling agent was recognized for selling $1 million a year in real estate. And I never will forget the first one of the sessions I went to. The first session, Edith Shellington, who is not with us any longer, got the $1 million award for sales in a man got, I think it was a $900,000 award for listings. And it was like that for a while. So it was a different ball game.
Yeah, it was. Wow. So Andrea, how was that transition from entering in and then moving into the brokerage side of things? So when did you first get licensed? When was that?
Well, actually, when I finished college, I went to Bob Brooks School and got licensed.
Sorry about that.
It's awesome. So I didn't. My license was with a holding company, but that was
Right.
when you had to go take the test, and then in 2 weeks they sent you the results.
Right.
1983. So, and in the early 90s, Dave and I were married. We had Adrienne, and we were expecting another baby. And I was working at St. Luke's Church. I was a business manager. And I was there every single day and every single night, and I thought, if I'm going to work this hard, maybe there's something else I can do. So I decided to go to work for my mother and Mr. Gully, and my first sale was to an Episcopal priest, so that's fitting.
Yeah,
Came right from
it works. Yeah,
it was like
That's
it was
nice,
done. Yeah, that's right. And when David and I stepped in after my father died and Mr. Gully died, it was very natural because I've grown up and
Right.
I grew up. But I really think I've had an interesting time frame because I started when we still had MLS books. I
Right.
remember the loose leaf papers that my mother had every week.
Right.
My sister and I would like, do those papers. Oh my gosh, pull out those. And then we had the book, and I actually remember being at a CE class at the Holiday Inn South on Airline Highway, and the instructor said, "You are not going to believe what's coming. It's called the World Wide Web."
Yeah.
I remember writing down World Wide Web. So I've been in a time where technology was not all that, and then of course it's everything.
Right.
Including,
And you've worked in both markets.
worked
Yeah.
in both markets, including, as you I'm sure remember, Katrina, when texting became all of a sudden a thing.
Sure.
And to see,
Because
but
you
when
couldn't get through on cell phones.
we didn't have cell service for all that time. Remember, a month or so at least,
Yeah.
maybe longer.
So what are some similarities? Like what from a real estate standpoint? What are some of the things, I guess, the tried and true that have always been there in terms of business, dealing with buyers and sellers and that sort of thing? If you've seen both sides, what are some commonalities?
So one of the big fears and over the years has been, well, technology is going to take over and we won't.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest commonality is it is a people business, and it's a scary thing for people to do. When I started selling real estate, well, I guess maybe 10 years ago even, the average homeowner stayed in their house about 7 years,
Right.
5 to 7 years. Well, now that number's pushed up to 10 years. And if you only do something once every 7 to 10 years, it's hard to pick it up and do it again.
Right.
And people need to look in somebody's eye and hear, these are the options, these are your choices, this is what's going to happen if you take option A, this is the likelihood of option B. So that is really the common, you have to know your business,
Right.
and you have to be able to talk to people, and you have to be able to help people at a time in which they're often feel very stressed.
Right. I thought that was interesting. Miss Phelps said when she got back into sales, or when she started into sales, she went back to the people that knew her from the Girl Scouts.
Yeah.
So it's same thing, whether it's in the 70s, 80s, 90s,
Right.
or even today. It's an interesting people business. Huh.
That's right.
So what do you see from the brokerage side? How has the brokerage essentially changed? I mean, sort of the attitude's probably not the best word, but there was a time where it was very broker centric, and
Yes.
now it's kind of turned in terms of agent centric, almost technological centric. So as a brokerage, how do y'all handle that?
Well, again, you have to stay on top of your game.
Right.
One of the biggest changes is there's so many business models now. When I started, there was a business model, and that was the way we all did business. And
Yeah.
now, just like everything, there are a lot of options, a lot of business models. And so one thing I think it's really important for for anybody, but particularly a broker, to know what's going on a national scale, so that when it flitters by my community, I can either be aware enough to grab it or know how other people have dealt with it.
Right.
And we do that. Dave and I do that by volunteering for the National Association of Realtors, and that's what keeps us connected.
You have to, yeah. All right, your turn. So how did it go from generation 2 to generation 3?
Well, after college, I moved to DC, and I worked in politics on Capitol Hill for several years. And at one point, I started thinking, what's my next move going to be? And I thought I could see myself at some point coming back to Louisiana, and I don't know when.
Thank goodness, just P.S. Thank the Lord for that.
We have a similar story. We go to DC,
Yeah.
we think we're going to change the world, and then
you saw the light of the
it's
Lord
like,
and decided to come home.
Louisiana just brings you back. It's like a tractor beam.
It does, and you get to, and you learn. You learn so much
Right.
by doing that. And I thought maybe one day I'll move back to Louisiana, but I was thinking sometime the next day, like it's on the table. And I told my sister that, and then my dad came to DC for a meeting or something and talked to me a little bit about getting into real estate, and said that they had a position that they were looking at within the company, and it was something that I'd always kind of thought about. But when you grow up with it, you have to, my grandmother lives next door to my parents. So growing up, there was not a conversation that happened at our kitchen table that didn't have real estate directly. And when we were growing up, that was before cell phones were really a thing. And so me and all my siblings were trained to answer the telephone. You had to say, "Hello, McKey residence," because could likely be a client for my parents on the other end. And yes. And so sometimes when that's right in front of you, it's not your first, what you think you're going to do. And so I did. I moved back to Baton Rouge and came on with the company. And it's so interesting, using the background, the business background that I have, but then also coupled with the real estate training that I've had from growing up. But there's so much that I didn't know that you learn once you get into it.
But I just want to say, and it was so fabulous when Adrienne came back in, because I thought, okay, we'll have to teach her all that. She's taught us so much. That DC experience that you know completely about was so refreshing. And she'd come in and we'd talk about a problem, and she'd have a wholly different spin on. I'm like, wait, you might be right. I think that's awesome. It has been so wonderful to experience that and to have that fresh air.
Sure.
It's an interesting industry because it's one that now everybody in the world, everybody in America, I think, has some kind of knowledge about, especially with HGTV. And you have
TV channels that are dedicated.
Exactly. You at least kind of know some of the jargon a little bit, enough to where you think you can be dangerous.
Right.
But it makes it's a different level when you're actually in the business. And so it's fun now because we can talk about things, and we can kind of get on a deeper level.
And Adrienne can identify with the young agents, and we have now lots of young people coming into the business, and they can identify with her more than they can dinosaurs.
Well, sure. Well, I wouldn't say that, but so what, from a new agent perspective, or what do you see in terms of them coming into the business? What challenges are they having?
I don't know if the challenges are anything different than what they have been, years from. I see a lot. It's an industry that has a low barrier of entry and a high barrier of success. It's, relatively speaking, fairly easy to get into. And so I think overall we're seeing, it's a fun industry, and so that attracts people. But some of the hardships are you've got to be able to do, just like my grandmother and my mom said, have that. You're in your business, and so it's that year or two of building, of having that platform and of recognizing it's all about people. And it's not going to come easily. It's not just a Facebook post. It's not just one thing. It's the whole mixture that comes, and you've got to work that over and over again.
That's an interesting just the whole entrepreneurial aspect of it, and it's work. I mean, it is work. There's not a whole lot to. It's relatively low barrier of entry compared to other professions.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, there is an amount of work.
And it's a people business, and I think we see that success. It's the same thing that they've both known forever. It's not a sales position. It's not a sales job. At the end of the day, it's a people job, and we've got to help.
So let's talk about that. Y'all all said people business. What does that mean? When you say people, does that mean phone calls, meetings? Like how do we define what a people business is? Because all three of you've said it, so I'm curious to what that means.
Yeah.
Well, I think, certainly phone calls and traditional interaction.
Right.
Phone calls. But to me, the real thing is, if we're sitting across the table and you're talking to me about buying a house that costs whatever, $250,000, and I've never done that before, as the realtor, you have to understand that I might be smiling, but inside I'm going, oh my God, I can't. And so you have to, that empathy, and then having the skill to get out ahead of it and say, look, I'm sure that this is scary, but these are all of the options. You have this choice, you have this choice, and these are the possible repercussions. So you do have choices.
Right.
And let's see which one works best for you and your family to move forward. That it's almost like being an armchair psychologist in some ways, because that to me is what makes the difference in success.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to get out and meet people. You cannot just depend on your friends and neighbors like you used to.
Right.
You have to be in clubs with groups, passing out cards, information. I mean, it can't just be, you have to talk to the man in line in front of you at the restaurant. You have to have that capability in order to do really well. And it used to be a man's world.
Right.
When I started, there were probably, other than the investment group, there were probably 3 men and 21 women. Well,
Opposite.
3
women and 21 men, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And now it's changed.
Right.
I don't know whether it's 50-50 now, but the women I've noticed over the past 50 years that I've done this, enough is never enough. If they make X number of dollars this year, they're not satisfied. Many times when I was in the business, a man said, I want to make $30,000 a year. He made $30,000 a year. Then he could go hunt, fish, and do that.
Right.
But females don't look at it like that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so they are out there hustling generally all the time. And I think that makes a difference when you go to an awards dinner now, how many of the women are recognized and how many of the men are as far as production, money, listings, and so forth.
Look at our market; it's predominantly women. I mean, especially in your top producers and things like that. So yeah.
Right.
Residential, certainly.
Ooh, yeah. So how's the market looking these days?
Good.
Good.
What do you have that you want to sell or buy?
Everything's for sale.
Good time.
Interest
yeah.
rates are great. If Feds say they're not going to escalate interest rates
Right.
for the rest of this year, that's a big thing.
Right.
That's a big thing. And market looks good
Right.
for this year.
So what do y'all keep an eye on when you're kind of looking for the market, or maybe looking for an investment, or figuring out whether the market's is good? What type of numbers do you look like? Indicators do you look at? I mean, interest rates, obviously.
Interest rates, jobs.
Yeah.
We have been so, you and I were talking about this a second, we're so lucky in this area because we have jobs.
Right.
We've got state government, we've got, LSU and
Universities.
Southern, we've got
Petrochemical.
petrochemical industry. So those are the three legs
Right.
that Rouge has done so well on. And as an example, when the plant in Zachary that makes paper products earlier in the year said we're going to lay off 700 people.
Yeah.
I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible. Well, within 4 days, other industries around came
Right.
and to snap those people up. So to me, the number one thing is jobs.
Right.
Number two are interest rates, keeping housing affordable. And number three is what is the availability of housing? And
Right.
that's where the issue is to some degree in our area and across the country.
Right.
There's some very little, because real estate builds from the bottom up. That first guy buys a house and then he moves that guy up and that guy moves up. So there has to be entry level housing, and there's very little new construction in that price range around here. So, as long as that's really where I think the focus is going to be,
Right.
because that's where that's what's keeping millennials
Sure.
in some ways.
And I think there's a lot to that. I think the entry level housing is mixed, and I think it has a lot to do with buyer attitude. I mean, in the past probably 2 years, and I was in Opelousas yesterday, and we were having this conversation. To me, the buyer attitude has changed. 2 years ago, even 5 years ago, you have the HD TVs and you have those shows, so people were willing to put a little TLC, a little elbow grease into a home, and then now buyers aren't interested in that.
They would like it
they want to
Right.
turn the key and
Walk
make
in.
everything done, and that's to some degree making listing agents work because listing agents for a long time have had a low inventory, and I don't mean this in the bad way, but they really haven't had to work that hard, and now they're having to work a little harder to kind of market and promote and sell the homes, especially the ones that aren't up to a buyer's standard. So I think we're seeing a little bit more of a neutrality there, which is going to be interesting.
And listing agents are having to educate their sellers.
Good
to
point.
to another degree about what's realistic in what condition. That has been a big issue with HGTV. Good news, bad news. Good news is people see it can be done.
Right.
Bad news is they want to blink and it's,
Oh, sure.
And I do too. P.S. I would like to
You
do
can't
that.
do it in 30 minutes, even with commercial breaks?
That's right.
Kidding me? So you have the benefit of being in two different markets. I mean, you
I
have
do.
a market in North Louisiana and a market in South Louisiana. So how do you see those?
They're very different markets. So when I moved back from DC, I was in Baton Rouge, and a year later, my husband and I got married, and he's a farmer in Shreveport, North Louisiana. So we were married 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, and after we were married, I moved up to Shreveport, and I love it. And so I am back and forth between North and South Louisiana. So I cross that Mason-Dixon line that runs through Louisiana every day, regularly. The markets are very different. Culturally, there's some difference
Right.
there. But at the end of the day, how you sell real estate is similar.
Right.
It all comes back to you got to have those relationships. You've got to be an expert in the market. You have to know what's going on. I see the average price of a home is higher in
Sure.
South Louisiana and Baton Rouge, where we're seeing that low inventory in Baton Rouge. We're not seeing as much in Northwest Louisiana. So it's a little bit different. But it's fun. It's fun to have access to both.
It's neat to see sort of the attitude of the agents in both of those markets, and I think that's what's cool about going to all the different places. And we were talking about Baton Rouge versus Lafayette, and it's not a bad thing, but the attitude of the agents in Baton Rouge are different because the market's different.
Right.
So they have different techniques, they've got different views
Yeah.
on buyers and sellers, and even from a negotiation standpoint, it's really cool. I mean, as an outsider looking in, it's really cool to kind of see the challenges that they're willing to overcome given their market.
Which is why it goes back to real estate is so local. We were talking about this last night at dinner, the three of us. It's so local, and so you have to that's part of the realtor's job
Right.
is to be in really involved in the community, in the really involved in your organizations, because attitudes are different and what's going on in the communities are very different.
Right.
You cannot come in as an outsider on a national level and say what's going to happen
Right.
in a local market.
And even from that standpoint, local, hyper local to that, because people don't necessarily care what's going on in the
Right.
7 parish area of East Baton or Baton Rouge. You know,
Right.
they don't even care what's going on in East Baton Rouge. I want to know what's going on in Zachary, or I want to know what's going on in Shenandoah, or I want to know what's going. You know, it's interesting, and from a technological standpoint, fortunately, we may have the ability to get the data, but it's understanding that and be able to communicate that.
Yeah, we see that we saw that in some of the outskirts of the Baton Rouge area. When I first joined, we in our company we have property tour, and so where we get in the car and go and preview our listings,
Right.
the company listings, and we have it categorized. You know, one day is Baton Rouge, one day is Ascension Parish. And for me, when I first got into the business, growing up, I had not spent much time in some of these areas, and that was really valuable. Getting in the car with agents who live in the area,
Right.
because they could tell me when you have directions, that over there is not the CVS, it's Uncle Bob's Corner Store,
Right.
and that's what everybody locally calls it, and you have to kind of know those references.
And why they're important.
Right.
And why they're
Sure.
important.
So one of the challenges that I see from agents, not necessarily new agents getting into the business, but there tends to be sort of a plateau period where agents maybe been in the business. Typically, I see it 2 to 5 years. They've reached maybe a cap. They've reached some place where they can't, whether it's 2 million, whether it's 5 million, whether it's whatever that number is, and for some reason they're trying to overcome that or break through. So from y'all's perspective, somebody that's kind of been there for a while, how can they, or what advice would you give them in terms of trying to just go to that next level?
You want to start?
Well, my philosophy is it's not what you make, it's what you save.
Okay.
It's not what you sell, it's what you buy. And so agents that have done well and don't want to exert anymore, hopefully they've made investments in their own real estate and they spend that extra time, energy, and money. They keep making their X number of dollars. But and I think I won't say most, many of your successful agents realize that the benefit to someone my age is the houses that I've bought, the investments I've made along with working.
Wow.
And that's my philosophy. Now, Andrea may feel different and can answer your question, but that's my answer to people that.
I think that's ultimately what folks are looking for is, more flexibility, more financial freedom,
Yeah.
and that's certainly one way to do it.
And it's probably the best way. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the greatest wealth. But my answer, I agree, but I have an addition, and my addition is, I don't care. So I've been a realtor for such a long time, and you can never beat an investment in yourself. And when an agent hits a plateau, one of the things I always look for is how can you invest in yourself? And the best thing to do is education.
Yeah.
Because things change so fast, and no one can ever be on top of everything.
Right.
And to get in there and either get a designation or take a refresher course or just, invest in some time educating yourself again, even if you only sell in one little bitty tiny subdivision as an example, to find out what's going on in the bigger world is revitalizing. And almost every time that gives that agent the shot of energy they need to break through whatever it is. And there's no reason not to now. I mean, you have podcasts, you have Facebook, you have every form of social, Instagram.
Right.
The classes we can take online, which I usually do on December the 30th.
You were good this
You know
year.
that.
You were on December 1st this year.
So,
A month ahead of time.
Yeah, there's no reason not to. There's no reason not to.
Right. And it doesn't have to be the most expensive class in the world,
Exactly.
but it can be, there's enough free resources online. But yeah.
I've seen that from having kind of a different perspective because I've been in the business for for
Right.
4 or 5 years, 5 years. And so for me coming in from not only the company perspective, looking at how do you help agents start careers and grow careers, but then also looking, at myself, how would I start my own career? And I think when you get there's that excitement and that exciting energy when you first get started, and you do take advantage. Now I'm generalizing, but usually agents who are focused in this business take advantage to as much training,
Right.
as much mentorship, as many resources that they can at the beginning, because that's what you have. You don't learn this industry by generally majoring it in college
Right.
or interning. You have to go in and hope that you have a partner to help you grow that. And you work so hard your first couple of years, way harder, and then it clicks. And then you get so busy doing the best care you can for your clients. And then sometimes we start losing some of that we did right at the beginning. And so that plateau generally happens when, like every life event.
Right.
And so you have to kind of go back to just like, it's good to have a good mentor, in our company, we have people coming in and visiting of, okay, what can I do next to look at what's going on in your life, to have that accountability of stepping out and what are some action items that I can be doing and usually, I would say, I'm taking notes from y'all, but usually it's back to getting back with your people, getting back, active in the community, doing things that bring you joy because the community sees that.
And getting back to the basics of when you started doing the right thing
Every day.
at the right time and being consistent with the basics and then building on that.
And I think that's, you're dead right. And I was a million different directions I could go here. But I think from your perspective, the life change, and I sort of look back on the 10 years of my life, and your expenses increase because, your family size increases.
Sure.
And so to some degree, you reach points in your life where you're just hungry and you want it more,
Right.
and you can get back to basics. But when your life is the same and you can reach that additional peak, it's just going to take a little bit more work in going back to or discipline, I guess, in going back to the basics. But I love the entrepreneurial spirit that started from you from the beginning. Even when you were, before real estate, and it's. The profitability piece is the part that frustrates me most about agents. Is you've got agents that make a lot of money, sell a lot of houses, but at the end of the day they're not profitable. And I just elaborate on that a little bit more, because it's something that I'm starting to see again more and more. Is you've got agents that are number one in their company, that are top 10 in their market. And we're coming up on a few days before taxes are due, and they're dead broke, and it just frustrates me that sort of expenses rise to the level of income. So elaborate more on that.
The first year that I worked, at the end of the year, nobody told me about taxes. At the end of the year, I owed $10,000 in taxes. I had to go borrow the $10,000 to pay it. And I think a lot of it depends on your background.
Right.
But I always encourage our agents. We have agents that make top dollar. Now, some of them will take around the world trips. But I always say, how much real estate do you have? What do you own? It's not, like I said, it's not what you make, it's what you save, it's what you invest. And if you so discipline yourself in the very beginning of taking off the top, off every commission, X number of dollars, until you can acquire a piece of real estate, it's not just selling real estate. It's not marketing a product. It's that, but what's in it for me?
Right.
At the end, when you're my age, 85, well, I don't want to have to list and sell it real estate. It's funny, we have an agent in our office, and I preach the same sermon to everybody that I talk to. And I was preaching this sermon to this young man who does well, but sells very low-priced houses, so he has to sell a lot more.
Right.
And I said, look, take your money that you make from these commissions and go out and buy you some rental houses like those that you sell. And he looked me square in my baby blue eyes and he said, Miss Phelps, I own 32 rent houses right now. So with some people, they get the point of it. But it's certainly something that if you get in on pre-development prices and buy and hold, if you get in on anything on the water, increases in value. I mean, that's part of, to me, that's part of what you learn from your business, and you take what you learn and you use it not only for the customer, but you use it for yourself.
It makes too much sense, right? It's the real estate business,
to
right?
me, it does.
Right.
But again, I'm a dinosaur.
Well, you've always said it's important to do that because it is your business, it's your industry,
Well,
and what
certainly.
you invest in what you know.
Yeah.
If you can invest in your business, what do you want to invest in?
Yeah, you can give it all to the stock market, and
Or pay the
Why
federal
would you?
government.
Yeah.
I graduated a degree in economics, and I still can't figure out the stock market. So I'd much rather put it in the investment piece.
And most of the wealth in the United States was created from real estate. Now, Henry Ford didn't make his money selling Ford automobiles. He had land out west where he struck it rich. I mean, the greatest wealth from the courses that I've taken that people have came from real estate. Right. Whether they made it and invested it in real estate, or whether they had it and then negotiated what's now a 1031
Yeah, there
to
you
get
go,
in
yeah.
their business. But real estate is where the money is, in my opinion.
Well, you're in the business, might as well take on. Go ahead.
Well, your point is, people they're number one agent and don't have any. And so when, we are independent contractors, so it's incumbent upon, if you're running your own business, which every single agent does, it's incumbent upon me to then discover, in addition to how to do my craft better, how to manage the back end portion. How to figure out what retirement's going to look like. Pretend like that ever happened to me. I'm not sure, but to look at that back end that people don't talk about as much.
And that's the hard part, to get people to everybody. There's a million classes about generating, all of the income, but there's a lot less about the other 50% of your business.
Correct.
And,
You're right. There's
and I
definitely a void
see.
there.
I don't mean this disparagingly, but you see, if you want to grow your business, you have to start a team, or you have to get a coach, or you have to spend this money here, and it's just, well, maybe we can take a look at the other 50%, or the expenses side, or we can. It was good. I'm glad that all of you said invest back in yourself and try and get back. You think about if everything stayed the same and you had one more transaction than you did last year. That's all profit, and you can just take that money and move it into some sort of real estate venture or whatever it is. So
Right.
it's refreshing to kind of hear that say. So I mean, and there are people with successful teams. I'm not saying it's a wonderful strategy,
Right.
But it's not for everybody.
No,
Yeah.
it really just boils down, whether you're doing a team or not or whatever it's return on investment. What is my return on investment? What do the numbers look like? Not how do I feel about it, but what do those hard numbers really say? Not about or a percentage, but what is the exact number? Because then with that, the same thing you would do with a client.
Right.
You would do exactly the same with the client. Do it for yourself.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's been 50 minutes,
Oh,
so flew by. Final thoughts? Anything?
I'm happy to see the energy that you bring,
No,
Yeah.
that like Adrienne's
Yes.
energy, that
Absolutely.
influx of new thoughts and ideas and new energy is just.
So where do you see the real estate market, or where do you see the real estate industry 10 years from now? I mean, what do you see 10 years from now? I mean, we've come a long way from a technological standpoint.
Yeah.
So fast forward 10 years, what do you think?
That's a good question. I cannot even imagine with the technology that's coming about every day. It's gonna be interesting the next 10 years, but hopefully the industry will always need people. And if they keep up with the times, with the technology, with the education, so be it.
Yeah.
But I don't think people can afford to get behind from now on. You can't slow down and not take advantage of every situation that comes along.
Yeah.
I'm too old to even envision 10 years from now.
What do you think?
I think so. The average age of a realtor has dropped.
Right.
You know, some years ago it was like 57, and now it's maybe
53,
45
yeah.
or 50. So I see that continuing to happen, which I think is fabulous.
Right.
I think it's healthy, and I mean, and I think, and what I hope is that we continue to use technology to make things easier and better, not only for ourselves but for our clients. I love all that big data. That I think is great.
I didn't know that about you. I didn't realize you were that into the
love
numbers.
all
It's
that.
fantastic.
She is. We just left a meeting and she was giving economic updates from different trainings that she's
Yeah.
gone to.
Some
Right.
people were rolling their eyes, but I ignored those people.
Yeah.
And just
did
kept
too.
on. Yeah. So that's what I see. Americans love to own a house. Home ownership is very important, and when you come across someone who's the first owner, they've no one else, their first owner in their family, no one else in their family, and so they've just changed a family dynamic because it's very likely then that their kids will be homeowners after that. So I'm very optimistic and excited about what it might look like in 10 years.
Yeah.
So I'll think about it later and call you.
No, perfect.
I'd be interested at your age and stage in life. What do you think the next 10 years will?
Well, what I've seen over the last few years, the very small amount of time that I've been in the business comparatively, there's been a lot of disruptors that have come in. I remember when I first moved back, I was doing some trainings on, Facebook 101 of why you have to be on Facebook and how to set up a page. And it seems like yesterday, but I mean that's so old now. And there's been a lot of things that come in. We are very, very fortunate where we have access to amazing big data. We have reports coming at us that we can easily go and create for our clients and use for ourselves. And I don't think those disruptors will stop. I see more and more, some of that technology coming in. But what I also see are agents lining up to have, coaching sessions with my grandmother. And she doesn't know that they're coaching sessions, but they'll see her walk down the hall and they'll say, "Ms. Phelps, I need to ask you about something." And obviously too with my parents, but at the end of the day, the responses are the same. And it's, our job is to create communities and to invest in our communities, and it's a wonderful career where you can give to your family, you can be involved, you can be a true professional as long as you are invested in it, not only financially, but with your time
Right.
and your knowledge. And so, and it's that going back and, being a good neighbor, being a good friend, reaching out. And those are the things and that hasn't changed. And so I don't see that core value changing. I
Right.
see some of the more things coming at us because we're easy people to market to.
Right.
Realtors are, because we're so busy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can, take that and kind of sift through it, but remembering our core values as realtors and upholding our ethics, I think
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a great outlook.
I think it happens. Yeah. I mean, there's the data is what it is, and I think I think the consumer experience might be different,
yeah.
Yeah.
but the realtor, well, even the realtor value might shift to some degree. I mean, even whereas 5 years ago, you have buyers that didn't know what they wanted. Well, now, because of the access and because they can walk in and say, these are the 3 houses that I want to see, and I'm going to buy one of them.
Right.
And they've already seen them by the
They've
time.
looked
I
at
mean,
them
they
online.
And it
they
does
pick
it-
out what
yeah.
they want.
So the experience is different, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, the relationship is what matters. And to be quite honest, the size of the transaction is what matters. I think because it's so big, they're going to want somebody that's professional in order to get through
Our job
it,
is
so.
to help and guide them, to be an advisor
Mm-hmm.
through that process. And so,
I will tell you what I'm seeing real interesting
What?
is with the efficiency of the transaction, and I'd be interested to see if y'all have this problem. With the efficiency of the transaction, e-sign, whole thing.
Right.
I'm seeing it because whenever we have a day before the closing and something goes wrong, people call me and, what do you do? How do I get out of this? What do I do? And I'm seeing problems between buyers and sellers in the transaction because they were sent digitally, where agents would have normally explained, we'd sit down at the table, we'd go over the contract. Well,
that communication, you've got to go back to
because
that.
it's being sent electronically and somebody can just press next initial, next sign, they don't understand the whole contract. And then we get 2 days before closing, we go, time out. This is not what I want. Whether it's registered sex offender, they didn't realize that was in there and they could go do that, or whether it's a component that's supposed to be, a refrigerator. So I have gotten probably in the past, definitely in the past 6 months, but probably in the past year, I've gotten more calls about contracts. And I think, I don't mean that's bad. I think that's a
Yeah.
good thing for us in terms of, yes, it's efficient, but they still need a personal touch.
Right.
It goes back to
in
that
terms of
we
trying
have
to-
all that technology, which is super helpful, but we've got to, as you've got to go back to that communication and sitting down and having that.
Do y'all see that at all? Do y'all
service.
see
Oh,
sort of
yeah,
some?
we do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's part of it. I think it goes back to, in my mind, to some degree, professionalism.
Sure.
Because if I'm distracted and I just send it out and based on that, because you trust me and you sign it, but really I was doing something else. So then I feel like for sure it's my issue. And so that is really I think that is a big professionalism situation.
Yeah.
And it is out there. And I find that most experienced agents are past that already, but newer agents who sometimes miss that in training, that's where the problem comes in.
And it's an efficiency piece. Go ahead.
And the paperwork is so much more complicated now, elongated
Right.
and complicated. It was pretty simple when we had a one-page contract, filled out one, flipped it over, there was
Right.
very little information, but there were very few mistakes that you could make.
That was the
And
size of the.
The contracts when I went to work and for a long time were one purchase agreement was one page. Front, flipped it over, back, signed it on the back. No disclosures at all, no. That was what you filled out.
Right.
And you took it into the attorney. Ben Downing was the board attorney at that time. And so you take it into Mr. Downing and for him to close the sale. And he'd look at, all of the legal papers. And he would look over at the client and he'd say, I'm not going to go through all of this. All it does is says, if you don't pay your amount, then they're going to take the house back. Would you sign?
There you go.
Never went through all of the humbug that it. And I don't know, I bet there are more lawsuits now than they ever were then.
True, I believe it. It's probably a
But it was
cleaner
simple.
transaction then.
It was simple.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I will say this one thing. There's a little plug right here. The National Association of Realtors has the professionalism piece, the CB, what's it called?
C2EX.
C2EX, which stands
Commitment
for
to excellence.
Thank you. And it's an app. Every agent can get on the app and go through, and it's responsive to the agent and to their. And I really like that piece that has come out.
They've just kind of given you that. It's a professionalism piece. and
Correct.
It's done very well. They did a great job on it.
Yes, and it's step one of 199 steps to
Right.
come. But it's a good beginning, and I'm glad to see that as an industry, we've got a concrete start to addressing
Sure.
that.
And it's a good program. As a distance learning educator, I'm a little jealous at how well it's done. They did a great
Oh,
job
really?
putting that together. Yeah.
I'm glad
So,
to hear you think that.
yeah.
Some of the animation, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's hard.
I'm
I
just
think
kidding.
That gets expensive.
Yeah.
So, well, thank y'all so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you for
I really
having us.
appreciate
This
it.
was a
Thank you
treat.
for
So-
doing this.
We'll come back next year and see what happens. Huh?
Yeah.
Thank you very
Super.
much.
You
Thank
do
you.
it very well.
Well, this was fun. This was great.